Hey everyone, Scott JUA from Crucible Custom Props, Nerfworks Lab, and all the forums here. This is the tutorial for the Han Solo stencils. First of all, you're going to need a couple things. You're going to need your parts, and we're going to do this. There'll be a lot of cuts because I'm going to do this in different stages. But basically, we're going to do this in a few stages. And first one we're going to do is the mystery disc. Why? Just because that's the one I have ready for us to do first. So anyway, you can do it in any order you like. I like to do it. Usually I do the mystery disc and then the crossbar and everything. Once I have it, and these will be the last two once I know they're torqued down and everything. So we'll get to that point here in just a little bit. First thing you want to make sure you have is either some 90% alcohol or some acetone for surface prep. You really want to get it as clean as possible, free from oils and stuff, and the Denex usually comes pretty oiled from the factory. So I've pre-done a couple things to this Denex here. There's some work for somebody else I had done. First thing you want to do is sand down this area. You can sand it however you like. It doesn't really matter. If you put a circle pattern in it, what I normally do to get the turn pattern is just to put some sandpaper on my thumb and turn it in the general area that I want to do. Now you want to wipe down the whole thing because you're going to be painting the whole bottom. Unless you do the blued way, then you'll just mask off and blue around that. But I do the painted way because I am certain that the whole lower is painted on the original prop. So you just wipe it down with alcohol or acetone, whichever one you have handy. Usually 90% alcohol will get the job done. The next thing you want to do is use if you have a DEC grill, you want to use that. If you have a Todd's grill, likely it already came on the Todd's blaster. You can pry that off if you'd like, and then sand your mystery disc. Actually, forget I even said that. I forgot that Todd's has his machined in. Now I believe, no, the DEC has it machined in as well. The DEC is exactly the same size as my stencil, so it's the right size. It's just slightly in the wrong spot. Now the Todd's one is in about the right spot, but I don't remember if it's the right size or not. I haven't had I believe it is, and this mystery disc is a 1-inch circle, so it should fit just fine. But if you're doing this from scratch and you have made your other grill out of some tonsnet cylinders, or you have one of these pre-made cast ones from Dark Energy Creations, you want to put that on there so you can get the approximate placing correct. Then you will, this one's the easiest one, of course. You will, in fact, let me pause that and get my tweezers real quick. So through the magic of pausing, I have my tweezers here. Now I like to use tweezers because I don't want to I want to get as little contaminant on the sticky surface as possible. So your mystery disc is going to be, some static is already pulling it down, but your mystery disc is going to be about right here. Maybe a little bit. And it's going to be, don't let it stick down all the way until you're certain of where you want it to go. There we go. So when it comes up, it just touches the bevel right here. So once you get it in the right spot, you want to smooth it down, and then you'll paint. And naturally you'll peel it up later. So that's step one on the mystery disc. So what I would normally do after that part is I would glue the grill down, the heatsink. I would glue that in place, and then I would spray it with, this is the paint I normally use for everything. Rust-Oleum Professional, high performance enamel, 15 minutes fast dry. So you spray it flat black. This is flat black, by the way. You spray it flat, and then when it's done, you take a shop towel or something and buff the flat surface, and it comes to that kind of satiny sheen of a well-used looking piece. It looks like the original prop. Looks like they spray painted it flat black, and then just by use it got polished a bit. So that's what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to be using, this is my grill I use for test fitting. The person whose blaster this is does have that grill, but he's going to be doing the finishing. I offered to give him the stencil and the paint done in exchange for letting me use his blaster to demonstrate to everybody the tutorial process. So I thank him for that, and hopefully he enjoys the fact that these stencils are going to be done. That's one less thing for him to do. He'll need to paint his grill and put everything together the way he wants it to. There were some other things I did. I milled out the Denix logo and drilled and tapped the studs and all that kind of stuff, and did the serial numbers and everything on the rest of us, and did the machine work for him to have DEC wooden grips. So anyway, long the story short, next step is to paint, and then we'll go from there. All right, so let's do the next part of this this setup here. I'm going to prep our crossbar here. Just wipe it off with alcohol. Again, I don't normally sand the surface, and the reason is because the original prop was made pretty crudely, and it was pretty scratched up from when it was built, so, and use and stuff like that. So I want the parts that show through to look more natural and to look like there were scratches behind it. But so if it's super clean all the time. Now if it's an anodized piece like the Todd's piece, or a blued piece like the Todd's piece, or an early DEC where it was anodized black, then you're gonna have to sand that stuff off, and it's no big deal. But these ones that come from DEC like this, I tend to leave them alone. Now this is the curved, the one with the curved edges, and the stencil will still work on those. Most of the time nowadays everybody has the nice flat cut, but this is the curved one. And so this is how we're going to do these stencils here. So I like to do these, let's do the left one first, just because that's the one I have in my hand. I like to do these a couple different ways. What you're gonna need, of course, is some painter's tape of some sort. I use the green frog tape. So first what I want to do is get a piece of this. You don't need a lot. Then stick it to your shirt or your shorts or your pants or something, and just stick it there while you do your next bit of work. The next thing you're going to want to do is, I like to do these in sections. So I will cut this in half. This is going to be the left side. I will cut this in half, and then I will weed out the portions that I don't need. The easiest way to do it is to just cut along the lines here. So you cut this out pretty much. Then you take your piece of tape and you get this right up at the edge so that you have an edge to work with. Okay, stick that down nice. You want to make sure, you don't want to do that, but you want to make sure that it sticks to the stencil. Then you peel it and you have your entire stencil here. So you determine, you want to pay attention with Field Marshal, because there is a distinct left and right side. This one doesn't matter. The Todd's ones don't matter. They're equal on either side. So what I do here is I look at it from the back and I line up the edge, make sure it's straight, and then I apply the stencil. Make sure you press it down pretty nice and good. Now the next part is going to be peeling off the tape. Now sometimes when you're doing this, you'll notice that it will start to pull it up. If you do, I use an X-Acto knife to help hold it down gently. You don't want to cut it or anything, but this is going to help with all of the very, very tiny parts. See like how it's starting to lift there? We don't want that to happen. So we're gonna help push that part down as we peel the stencil off of the tape. And then sometimes that happens, right? So this is a worst case scenario. This is gonna help some of you guys. So what happens sometimes is the part you want to stay masking comes off. So pull the part you don't need, get rid of that. And what happens here is, since we were so close to that edge, this is where your tweezers come in really handy. You just gently place it where it needs to go, And your X-Acto can come in handy here where you just help press it down, use it as a kind of a tool. And you get your stencil and make sure that it goes where it needs to go. Now this one's a little more difficult because of the rounded edge. It gives you a little bit less space to work with. And I don't know, I think Dave has changed those. So what you can do there is just put a tiny cut in it and overlap it. And then make sure it's nice and pressed down. Okay, so that's the one part. The next part you're going to need, I'm going to pause this and I'm going to put the crossbar in here so we know how to where to place the next part. Okay guys, so I'm back. I marked the spots where the mount sits across, and I have come back and mounted this again. So we're going to make sure that the stencil is really nicely pushed down, and then we're going to kind of do the same thing with this side. We're going to use our X-Acto as a tool to help keep this laid as we slowly and gently pull up. Now there are a lot of tiny details on this piece as well. Don't think you have to get every single one of them. It's not worth the headache. There are really small micro dots here. If they pull up, no big deal. You can look at the reference photos and do those by hand. So we have that piece now. Now, since we're here, we got this rounded edge again. Let's just make sure it's all really stuck down really well here before we pull it back up. And then we start the process of weeding it out and peeling off this. So this part is tedious. And this isn't even the most detailed one. So what we're going to do here is grab our tweezers or fingers if you're comfortable with that. And then you can slowly start to... Let's see if this is on camera. Nope, sure not. Okay, so we can slowly start to make sure that these small pieces here, see, they're going to come up, and it's going to be very hard to keep them down. If they come up, there's microscopic dots. You know, it's not that big a deal. You can do those by hand later. The main things are the big parts, the very recognizable parts. Some of the small ones you can probably get to lay back down, and some of them you're not going to be able to. It's just how much time do you really want to spend on those tiny ones? They're there, and they're there for you if you want to do them, but they can also be quite frustrating to get to stay. Personally, I'd rather get the big ones, the big parts that are important, and I can come back and hand scratch the ones that aren't. So at this point, you can see that this is a little bit crooked. So I'll gently pull it up with my tweezers and lay it back straight where it belongs, right there. And we should still got some of the small pieces there. As you can see, some of the really small pieces are still there, but the other ones, after you've painted it and everything, you can just go back by the reference and just scratch those tiny dots in. But now we have the two main pieces for the left side of the crossbar. I will go ahead and prep and cut the next ones, and we'll do those. All right, so now we have the next piece, which is going to be the left side of the crossbar. I mean, the right side of the crossbar, left closest to where the mount goes, and I've marked that area as well. Kind of the same process. Just peel your, after you get it taped on, you want to try and line this up as best as you can. Usually it helps if there's light. You can see behind where the stencil's going, so you can line that up and get it. See, I don't know if that comes across on the camera, but you can kind of see the light behind. You can put a flashlight or your phone or something behind it to help line it up. That way it's more evenly, it's easy to see where it's lined up. Press that stencil down nice and good, and you're still going to have some challenges getting these things up. There are a lot of tiny bits on here, So let's make sure I'm on camera. Okay. So you're going to start slowly peeling that back. And again, the same rule applies as the other one. There are going to be some small details that may not be important to keep if you can hand scratch them back in. And there will be some much larger pieces that you definitely want to try and keep. Some of this stuff you're going to weed out. Like this piece here that just came out, this tiny speck. We're not going to need that anyway because it's going to come out. So that's fine. The majority of the good stuff is still there. And then right toward what part got lost there. But in any case, here we are. We're still working on this one stencil here. I may have hit a 10-minute limit on the phone camera. I wish there was a way not to do that. So anyway, I got everything separated here from that part. This is probably the most tricky one. And then you need these tiny little spots to come out. These are, and I recommend if you want tweezers like this, go to your hobby store, your local hobby store. They usually have things like this for modeling. This is on camera. It is, sort of. My big hand's in the way. So anyway, you want to gently get these parts out that you don't need. Oops. Get off. Get off. Thank you. It is a bit tricky. So this piece right here, this came off the stencil and it's put in a spot where it doesn't need to be. So I'm going to move it back down to where it's supposed to be. It's about right there. And then I'm going to make sure everything's nicely stuck. And then we'll move on to the final piece here, which is going to be this one. I'll pause and we'll come back. Okay guys, so we got that one stuck down. We're going to peel it and we're going to do the final side. Again, we'll use the light from behind and also lining it up visually. Get that stuck down. Try not to stick it down on your other template that you've placed so it doesn't pull those up. Now this one sucks too. It's got a couple small parts that you definitely want to keep. And they're mostly on these round edges. So this is not the best. It'd be nice if you had the DEC kit with straight edges. If you don't, this is the worst you'll have to deal with. The Todd's kit is a bit smaller. This DEC kit works on Field Marshal and of course Dark Energy Creations. But hopefully you'll get one of the Dark Energy Creations sets with the flat bar instead of the rounded bar. So there's that. Now what I notice here is right off the bat is I'm a little crooked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to weed the parts I don't need first, and then I'll adjust it. Okay. So this part goes easy until you get to these small bits right here, and these are tiny. Okay, so they didn't want to come off, so we'll manually restick those. So we'll get rid of that. We don't need that in our face right now. So when you have this situation, you want to gently pull with your tweezer at the base. If you pull too far from the tweezer, it's just going to bend the vinyl, right? And you don't want that. I'm going to stretch it, sorry. So you're seeing the actual worst case scenario of applying this stencil. Most of the time these go much smoother and easier for me. This DEC bar with the rounded edges makes it a bit difficult for sure. But in the end, when it's painted, it will be all good. Now I don't quite like how this one's sitting, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it right there and just overlap that edge. Oh, it's so hard to do. This will be a little easier. Make sure it's pressed down. Now these guys need to come down a bit to right here, and this one will come down. Come here, right there. Voila. Okay, so that was the hardest. Those are the hardest parts. The next thing you want to do is stick this on your gun with the studs, spacers in between, and I'll explain. So once you get the spacers on there, you want to tighten these down just about as tight as they'll go, and then paint the whole thing together. So that way these are in the positions that they need to be. So you got to tighten them down as far as you can get them without destroying anything, so that they're tight and in the right spot for your final build. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then we'll see what our results are later. Okay, just a quick talk about the round bits. The round ones are much easier, I find, and also much harder sometimes. So when you weed these off, it's best to just take this off completely. The second one has a slight gap, so you just want to cut that little gap right there. So this will come off all, the outside will come off all in one piece. Then it's much easier to deal with as far as putting these on the discs themselves. Okay. All right. Oh, get off, please. So the next step is your painter's tape, and I will pause here and show you after these stencils are on the discs themselves. Okay, I'm going to show you this one here. So I got this one stuck down. These are always a little tricky. And you don't have to do it my way. You can do it whatever way you want. Trooper Trent made some pretty good instructions. I'm just showing you the way I do them. Maybe it's not the best way. Maybe you guys have a better way. Post it up in the forums. I don't know. This is the process I go through when doing them. It is tedious work for sure. And again, like the others, there are going to be some really small dots that you're not going to be able to transfer over. It's okay. Those things you can add later by hand. And usually always those outer rings will peel up. It's okay. You can adjust those anytime after you get the main part on. This is where it gets tricky about getting all these little spots off. Is it on camera? Yes, it is. Okay. The machine does a good job of cutting these, but there's a lot of challenges because it sticks to itself a lot. So it's very difficult to get these pieces off sometimes. So if they do come off, the main thing is just to remember you can put them back down after they come off if you're very careful. Okay. The other one's a bit easier. So when this happens, you have some parts that moved around where they don't need to be. Just take a look at your reference pictures and re-stick them where they belong. This one is not really even necessary. You can easily scratch that in by hand. This one's a little bit too far. There we go. Now I've noticed there's been some variation in the disc size, but generally they're consistent. Sometimes like if you use the McMaster carve found part for the disc, for the thumb nut, then it's a little larger, which is what the original DEC was based off of. And I think he machines these aluminum ones himself now. Oh my God, so this whole time I was not recording, I guess. It's a little frustrating, guys, I'm sorry. But anyway, we got this one on here, and I will do the next one and show you that. Okay, I think we're rolling. Okay, so we got this one stuck down, and we're going to go through the tedious process of getting this last bit up. This is the last one before paint. Thank goodness. This is such a tedious process, and this one has a lot of small parts to it, like the other one. If they peel up, don't worry about it. The smallest pieces you can just scratch by hand. Look at your reference and scratch those by hand. Not a big deal. I don't expect anybody to get most of these small parts. And you can just, you know, they'll come up. They may come up. Once you get it laid down, the next challenge is to get all the big parts off. Let's see. Some of these small pieces may not stick. That's okay. Just redo them by hand. It's not worth the frustration trying to get them to stay and get them back in the right spot. It's easier to look at the reference material and just re-scratch those tiny parts by hand. Because trust me, you can spend a lot of time cussing at this thing to get those tiny parts. If you're lucky and everything sticks well, then they may stick. Like some of these did stick pretty well. If not, you just do it by hand. And where you had that cut here that I made, the vinyl will move a bit. So you just want to grab your tweezers. I'm telling you, tweezers are almost a must. This stuff is so small, and if you try to do it with your fingers, it's not gonna work out very well, because it'll stick to your fingers. So anyway, you get everything placed down, make sure it's all stuck, go over all of the other parts of the stencil, make sure everything's stuck well. Again, this is the worst case scenario. Oh, see, I screwed something up over here. So what we're gonna do, I don't know if you guys can see that. So somehow this rolled up over here. I'm just gonna fix it. That's why you're gonna go over everything before you spray paint on it. Make sure everything's stuck down nice and good. Now this is the worst case scenario. This was the worst case that you'll deal with. A DEC with the rounded edges. It's really no fun. It makes it much harder to do. The Field Marshals is fine. The other DEC versions with the flat edge is great. The Todd's usually doesn't have too much of a problem. Todd's is pretty rough, but it usually works out pretty well on those. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's applying the stencils. Now you want to paint everything. Ideally, you'll have this on here too if you want to paint that. Some people want to blue it. This is going to be left for the owner to do, because I don't know how he wants it finished. He wanted to finish this himself. I traded this. I gave him the stencils and the paint work in trade for let me show you guys how to do it. So that's it. Hopefully, when I edit everything, it'll be good to go. Oh, and I did spray this already once with the mystery disc right here. So I'm gonna go spray this real quick, and it'll be nice and uniform. And then when I peel everything off, so what I do typically, that paint that I showed you earlier, spray it, and then as it's hanging, I usually spray mine outside so it hangs in the sun. If I didn't do it in the sun, if you have an oven that you can use for paint, I don't recommend your kitchen oven at 220 or 225 degrees with only metal parts. And the pewter parts, I would not recommend baking pewter parts, but if you have aluminum and steel, you can. But the pewter parts, I do not recommend baking. I've heard of people melting things, so don't do that. But sitting it out in the sun after the 15 minutes of the paint dry is good. Sitting it out in the sun will give you for a few hours. It'll cure about 2/3 of the way. Then you just let it sit the rest of the time. But then you can start to peel off your stencil. So next step will be peeling off the stencils after it's painted. Okay, folks. So here we go. This is a couple hours later. The paint has been applied. We're all set. And one of the things I do normally is take a shop rag or a paper towel or something and kind of give the paint a quick kind of buff just with the paper towel. And what it does is it makes it look more worn and lived in, used a little bit. It's nothing special to it. You just kind of give it a rub on the surface. It polishes a tiny bit and adds some artifacts, so it looks like it's a little bit lived in. You do that on the crossbar, do that on the circles and everything, and if it starts to peel up the stencil, that's fine. That's what we're about to do anyway. So this is just one of the little things I do just to kind of give it a little bit more used look. So then what you want to do is grab your tweezers and gently pull off the stencil. Now if your paint isn't cured enough, you may get some pulling up of the paint. Well, in that case, you just kind of got to live with it, or you can hand touch up some paint if you want to redo that. Your X-Acto knife will come in handy here to help things along. Pretty straightforward, really. You just start removing. Your X-Acto knife is really useful for the tiny pieces that do get. Now, one of the things I normally do is I have a piece of tape, and this is useful. If you have an old piece of tape, even better. But if not, just grab a new piece, double it up on itself, and have a sticky spot. Have a piece of tape close by, so when you do get stuff on your X-Acto or your tweezers, you can transfer them off like so. You just want to pluck it and get it started, and then just lift. Some of these are going to be a little harder. Now, the DEC and Todd's are symmetrical. The Field Marshal one is actually more like the original prop, whereas the stud holes are the same spacing on all of them, but the Field Marshal has this correct offset on either side. So the Field Marshal one is probably the most accurate crossbar. When we were talking about that, we were both talking about making sure that it had the correct offset, because none of the others had done that. So as you can see, it's coming off fairly easily, which is good. You don't want to cake on your paint when you do the paint. You want to have a good coat, but you don't want it to be so caked up. This is actually, these stencils took a while to get done. The original file for it is very detailed, more detailed than the plotter can actually handle. But the guy who was doing these does triple prints as well, and he had a machine issue, and at first a lot of the detail was lost. So the first batch I got are completely useless. It kind of like, I don't know how to say it, it simplified the shapes, and made them less than usable. So we had to go back to the drawing board. He figured out what the problem was with the machine and got that going. And then we had some quantity issues where some were printed and some weren't. I originally had these all on together as sets, as one sheet. So I would cut out a large sheet and you would have both sides and the two knobs, and the mystery disc was always separate. But anyway, he cut those apart and did each shape per sheet. And so I think when doing that, it kind of made it harder to keep count of what there was. So that's why it took so long for me to get these in stock. It's because just because of some logistics issues on his end. But the end of work is incredibly good. And the stencil is slightly more detailed than my original ones that I was using, that I had printed at Blue Realm when I used to work there. So these are better in every way. There's more to that one. And I encourage you to not baby it. So, I mean, you want to be careful with the parts you stenciled, but the rest of the blaster, don't baby it. The original prop was very worn, so let it bump up against things and stuff like that, and you'll get a more authentic looking prop in the end. So this is pretty much it, guys. I know it's going to be kind of a long video, and I'll try and edit it down. But there you go. This will sit like this, and you'll be square. Now the last thing is the mystery disc. Now let me tell you about the mystery disc. What I do here is, of course, you peel up the masked portion, and what I do next is I get a small toothpick with a piece of black paint and just put the center dot right there, because that's all it is paint. It's not drilled. And so that's pretty much it, guys. That is the complete stencil work and the end product right there. The rest of it, you know, there's some tiny little scratches here and there, some little scratches over here. You can take your X-Acto knife and just kind of add those in as you go. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go look at the reference and go ahead and do that, and I'll also do the little dot there. But as far as everything goes, there's a Denix with a DEC kit. Let me bring that a little closer to the camera so you guys can see that up close. So that's it. See if it gets focused there. Yeah, okay. All right, thanks for watching. Happy stenciling.